Okay, good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to see everyone here. At this point, there are no viewers, so I want to welcome everyone who's watching and who's watching, not watching live, obviously, but watching taped. Before we start, I just want to first of all say that tonight's broadcast is brought to you by a couple of corporate sponsors, of course. The first corporate sponsor is Apple, because everything I use is Apple. So that's the first corporate sponsor. The next corporate sponsor is Nespresso. I have my iced coffee here ready to go. So Nespresso is the second corporate sponsor, and of course the letter H for history. Right now, we have a couple of questions lined up, but what I'd like to do, and as you come into the video, you can say hi through the Q&A. Reminder, you can send questions in. You can send questions in you can send questions in via the Q&A app here, or you can send questions in via email, and we'll deal with it on both ends there. So there's a couple of functions. Again, you can send in questions in the Q&A app. Right now, there are just 2 questions, both of them from Tamira, and I'll get to those questions in a couple of minutes. You can also, there is a chat function, and I will start with the first chat. You can add stuff in the chat if you'd like to, or you can go into the again, you can go into the Q&A and do it that way. Yeah. So what I want to do before we really get into the questions, and again, send questions in via email, send questions in during the Q&A via the Q&A app. What I want to do is just talk for a couple of minutes about the structure exam, just to go over it, provide some more details if we haven't, details which we haven't necessarily talked about in class. But just as a reminder, oh, where those questions go? Tamira, did you take those questions down? Where those questions go? Questions? Okay. Just to talk about the exam again for a couple of minutes before we get into the questions. The exam is 3 parts. You have the essay questions already. One of those essay questions will appear on the actual exam. You should prepare all 3. One of them will appear on the actual exam. The reading, you'll get the reading. There are 5. You'll have to answer 5 out of 6 questions on the reading. The questions are largely based on interpreting the reading. There are a couple of questions where you will be asked to take what's in the reading and to view it, compare it, contrast it, view it within the broader context, confines of what we discussed in class. That's one other element. Again, you'll have to do 5 out of 6. And in the third section, which are the short answer, you are asked to do 6 out of 12. Your choice to do 6 out of 12, your choice to do whichever questions you want to, and there is extra credit on that section. So you can do an additional question on that question. Let's see. Okay. Got an email. Just to throw out a question, can everyone see me and can everyone hear me? If you can, type in the group chat that you can hear me, that you can see me. Just make sure. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see me? Yes, maybe. You can go into the group chat and just click if you can hear me, if you can see me. Or go into the Q&A and ask a question, or send me an email. Let's see. Let's see. Is it working for everyone? I think it is. Yeah. Okay. Is this? I'm just typing into the chat. Is this working for everyone? Okay. At this point, we don't have any questions. There are no questions. Oh, wait. Where is the group chat? That is the question from Tamira. Very good question, Tamira. The way I have it is on the side of my screen. There's a button to click on chat. So it's on the left-hand side of the screen. I don't know. There we go. Okay, good. If you can find it, that'd be perfect. You can also just ask questions via the Q&A, and that's yeah. So now that I've selected your question, where is the group chat? Again, it's a sidebar for me on the left-hand side of my screen, but I don't know where it would be for you necessarily. All right, so I'm waiting for your guys' questions. So you guys are supposed to have questions. Do you have questions? Where are the questions? I could just talk about stuff. I can go on and on and on and on and talk about stuff for a long time. But I have a feeling you guys want to hear about stuff regarding the final. I would say in terms of study strategies, I know we're a week out from the final, and I know some of you probably haven't given it a lot of thought given you have other finals. What my suggestion would be, oh, there's a question from Samira. Thank you. I'll get to that in a second. My suggestion for your studying should be to start with the essays, because the essays will really provide for you a context by which to begin structuring the materials. And then as you're going through the materials, to think about connections, to think about how, for instance, different forms of leadership within Islam, let's say, the ways that Sunni and Shia see leadership, and compare it to other forms of leadership that we've talked about, whether it's the Pope, whether it's kings, whether it's monarchy, and to think about similarities, to think about distinctions, to think about changes. I think that would be a way for you to think about it, and I think it would be an interesting way for you to think about it. Okay, we're going to begin. Tamira has the first question, so we're going to begin by talking about Genghis Khan, and talking really about the Mongols. So we're going to start with this question here: Who is Genghis Khan? So we talked about Genghis Khan within the context of China, and when we introduced the Middle Ages, we talked about first, before talking about the European Middle Ages, we talked about China, and we talked about the rise of China. Again, we did this in the context of trying to understand and trying to compare the Asian Middle Ages to the European Middle Ages. Genghis Khan is part of the Mongols. The Mongols were nomadic people from Central Asia, from Eastern Central Asia. The leader of these people, of the Mongols, was named Temujin, aka Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was born in the middle of the 12th century in 1167. And he united the Mongols into a united confederation. And part of that involved, or a large aspect, an important aspect of that was called the art of steppe diplomacy, which meant that for the Mongols, for Genghis Khan, the key element was showing personal courage in battle, loyalty to the allies, a willingness to do anything to win, a willingness to do anything to defeat your enemies. the goal was military victory, and the goal was military victory using any means possible, whether it was psychological warfare, whether it was tricking enemies, anything that was possible. That is what Genghis Khan and the Mongols would do in order to achieve victory. Now, Genghis Khan, in the 25 years that Genghis Khan and the Mongols were able to push the boundaries from Eastern Central Europe, they conquered more land than the entire Roman Empire. Again, Genghis Khan does this from the very early stages of the 13th century, from about 1205, 1206 until 1227. And what Genghis Khan establishes is the Mongol Empire. This vast Mongol Empire, beginning in what is today modern-day China and extending all the way west through basically Central Europe. Eventually, and we talked about this in class, by the middle of the 13th century, 1259, the empire that Genghis Khan creates splits into four separate sections. Four separate sections. And at that point, all of the different khanates, as they're called, go their separate ways, even though they are related to each other. So that's, in general sense, that is Genghis Khan. Okay, that was a good first question. Okay, let's see. Addison, I'm just deleting one of your questions because it's not really a question, and that's fine. Okay. You want the Genghis Khan video? Okay, so I'll put the link to the video up on Haiku. So Tamira's question on the Genghis Khan video, I'll put the link up on Haiku, so we can all revel and watch it many times. Okay. Next question from Addison. To what extent do we have to know about all of the kings? Well, I mean, we talked about a couple of them. You read about a couple of them. You should know the key things that they did. You should know the most important aspects of what they did in terms of the various medieval kings, whether it's King John and Magna Carta, and all 5 of you who were in class that day, I'm sure, can send your notes to the rest of the class. So whether it was King John and Magna Carta, whether it was Charlemagne, whether it was William the Conqueror, you need to know the key elements of what they did. That doesn't mean you have to know every single exacting detail, but you need to know, again, the key elements and the elements that we discussed, so that you can briefly, let's say, compare what Henry II did with the constitutions of Clarendon and to something to Henry Henry IV or to another king. So in terms of what you need to know really just the very broad. You need to know the major aspects, the major elements of what these kings accomplished, and to be able to speak for a couple of sentences, at least in the short answers, to talk about what they did. You know what you're expected to talk about with the essay questions. You have the essay questions, and this sort of gets, Aaron, to your question about going over the 3 essay questions, and I'm just going to bring up the 3 essay questions. Just give me 1 second. You have the 3 essay questions, so you know what's expected from you for the 3 essay questions. You know the sort of the extent of what you're expected to do for the 3 essay questions. I'm just bringing the 3 essay questions up. Okay, here. So let's start with number 2 to talk about the 3 essay questions. And I'm just going to end this question and start the next question started from here. Could you please go over the 3 essay questions? So again, you have these questions here. You know what you're going to be expected to do. So just to talk about the second essay question, what elements of society and culture shape the global Middle Ages to a greater degree, politics, religion, or economics? So in this regard, you have to choose one. You have to choose politics, religion, or economics. You have to choose one of these elements, one of these elements as part of the global Middle Ages. And what that means is, when I talk about when the question asks you about the global Middle Ages, you shouldn't think specifically or only exclusively about Europe, but think about the Mongols, and think about the broader contexts of the Asian Middle Ages. So you should think about, as you're answering the question, whether in the context of the global Middle Ages, politics, religion, or economics shaped the Middle Ages. And you need 5 examples to prove your case. Again, you're choosing one. You're choosing either politics, religion, or economics. You're not choosing all 3, but your thesis should be concerning one of these specific elements. That was the second question. In terms of the third question, or let's talk about the first question, compare and contrast the consequences of the fall of the Han Dynasty in China and beyond to the fall of the Roman Empire in Europe through the year 1100. What similarities and differences do you see between the consequences, meanings, and outcomes in the fall of these 2 empires? So you're not talking about the Han Dynasty, you're not talking about the Roman Empire. You're talking about what were the consequences of the fall of these 2 empires. So in the context of the Roman Empire, you're going to talk about the rise of the early Middle Ages, and you can use that to then move into talking about the rise of the Carolingians, and talk about the rise of kingdoms within Europe. Again, the question asks you to think about it within until the year 1100. That's a fairly vast time period. In the context of China, you have to think about the fall of the Han Dynasty, what the consequences of that fall were. To talk about the Sui Dynasty, to talk about the Tang and the Song Dynasty, and then to talk about the similarities and the differences between the consequences. Are they similar? What are the outcomes, the meanings? Are the consequences, are the meanings, are the outcomes similar to each other, or are they different? And that's something which you need to think about. It's not an easy question to focus on, but that's something. But again, you're not focusing specifically on the Han Dynasty, on the Roman Empire. You're focusing on the consequences, and whether the consequences are similar, whether the outcomes are similar, whether the meanings are similar, or whether they are different from each other, and to talk about these consequences in a meaningful way. The third question is a little more involved. This involves our discussion of feudalism, Mark Bloch, and based on your understanding, analysis of the European Middle Ages, does Mark Bloch's analysis of the feudal society offer relevant and a useful way of feudalism in the Middle Ages? Basically, what I want you to do, and what you should be doing in this essay question, is thinking about what Mark Bloch has to say, thinking about his description of feudal society, thinking about the dual ages of feudalism that he describes, and to think about whether Bloch offers a useful way of understanding feudalism and the broader developments of the Middle Ages. Meaning, does what Mark Bloch do, does this really help us understand the Middle Ages? Does this help us understand feudalism? And as you're thinking about Mark Bloch and you're thinking about what he has to say here, try to think of, and this is part of the question, one critique of his understanding of feudal society. Again, we talked about feudalism not only from Mark Bloch's perspective, but from other perspectives. We talked about the dual, or the Anglo-American and the Marxist perspectives, perceptions of the Middle Ages. Again, Mark Bloch is moving away from those analyses. So does Bloch, in this, again, in this excerpt here, in this statement here, as well as in the his understanding of the dual stages of feudalism, the question that you are being asked is this relevant? Is this a useful way for understanding feudalism? And is this a relevant and useful way for understanding the Middle Ages? Can we take Mark Bloch and can we take what he says? concerning feudalism? And can we say this is useful, this is helpful, this helps us understand the Middle Ages? And can we say this helps us understand the nature of feudalism? That's what you have to do. And again, all three of these questions will help us define sort of the contours, the aspects of what you should be studying for. Okay, that will end that question. Okay. Michal emailed a question. Let's see. Did I get the question? Michal. Oh, so that's the one you asked here. Okay, I see. Let's see. Before I get there, let's see. People are having trouble accessing the Google Hangout. Please make sure to remind them to use your Frisch Google, your Frisch accounts, because that's the only way you'll be able to access it, I think. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let's talk for a minute. Here, let's talk about Michal's question. Okay, can you please go over a little bit about the reason for the Magna Carta and the effect of the Magna Carta? Okay, so we talked about the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta comes about as a result of King John, and King John, who rules England following the death of his brother Richard, begins rule in 1199. King John generally is seen as one of the pretty terrible kings of England, and Magna Carta comes about largely because of the king overextending his rule. Excuse me. Iced coffee, Nespresso. Again, this night is sponsored by Nespresso and Apple. I just have to mention the corporate sponsors over and over again. They're not going to sponsor these evenings if we don't mention them constantly. So it's important, obviously. But King John, in ruling England, did some pretty difficult things. First of all, he got into difficulties with the church, with the Pope. He was excommunicated from the church regarding the appointment of bishops, archbishops, specifically the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's one issue. Another issue is that King John placed a tax on those on individuals who had gone on crusade, and he placed this tax on those who got on crusade because he needed to pay for his army. He needed to pay for building castles. He had raided the royal treasury, and the nobility in England in the early 13th century said enough. They began to revolt. They began to rebel. And the Magna Carta is basically the peace agreement that was reached, or the set of stipulations, the set of requirements that the nobility of England were going to be placing on King John specifically and all future kings. The nobility wanted greater say. They wanted a greater say in government. They wanted a restriction on the king. They wanted a restriction on his power. They, in essence, were creating a first formal constitution of limiting the power of government. Taxes couldn't simply be levied on the people, on the nobility. Taxes can only be levied under very strict circumstances. The point of Magna Carta. The point of Magna Carta was really to, where did the question go? The point of Magna Carta was, again, to place restrictions on the king, and to to place restrictions on the king and to show that the nobility still wielded power. this was a moment. This was a moment unlike really any other up to this point in medieval Europe, because the nobility were making a case that they were more powerful than the king, even though the king basically had unlimited and unrestricted power. And even though, and we talked about this in the context of feudalism, even though there were points in time, particularly in the 10th and 11th centuries, where the nobility wielded more power than the king, this document actually formalized that. This document actually put pen to paper and said, these are the restrictions placed on the king by the nobility. This was unprecedented in that context, in that nature. Again, the king had to keep to a variety of very specific, very strictures, whether it comes to criminal justice, whether it comes to taxes, whether it comes to imprisoning people. And this really hadn't been done up to this point. Okay, good. Let's see. Let's take this from Tamira. And to what extent do we need to know what we learned on the last day? So we were talking about in the last day the Italian Renaissance. Nespresso iced coffee. Very good stuff. And again, sponsored by Apple and the letter H for history. What do we know? What do we need to know about the last day? We talked about the Italian Renaissance. You had a reading about the Italian Renaissance, Addison. This also answers your question. Are we expected to know more about the Italian Renaissance that we learned in class? You have the reading. A lot of what we covered in class was in the reading regarding humanism, regarding some of the most important works of art. So make sure you know that. Make sure you have that down, and you have an understanding of humanism, understanding the rise of the Italian Renaissance, the meaning of the Italian Renaissance, what the Italian Renaissance represented. So this was a reading that you had. We talked about it briefly in class, so that's what you are expected to know. Done here. And I'm just going to click Addison on your question again. What do you expect are we expected to know more? Again, you're expected to know what you had in the textbook, what you had in that reading, and what we did in class. Okay, let's take a question. Let's see. I'm just going to check the email to see if there are any email questions here. No. Okay, good. Sorry, I'm just going to close a couple of things on the computer. All right. 1 minute. Sorry, I'm just answering an email here. This is fascinating stuff. Okay, so let's go to another question here. Let's go to Nina's question. Can you go over the Great Schism, its aftermath, and what it means for the politics of this time? Nina, I'm not sure. Do you mean do you mean 1054, or do you mean the 14th century? Because there's a Great Schism of 1054 and the Great Schism of the 14th century. Can you? I'm just gonna push this question off to a side. If you can ask the question more specifically, if you mean the 14th century or if you mean the 11th century, and if you could re-ask the question, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, to answer Michal's question here about what kinds of drink it was. Yes, again, Nespresso, iced coffee. It's a it's called Intenso, the actual coffee, so it's intense, with a shot of espresso, and then there's also a little bit of almond milk in here also, which is very good. At this point, the ice has melted, so it's a little watered down, but it's still obviously amazing because it's Nespresso. So cheers. Fantastic. Okay, so Nina, I'm just going to go back to your question here. The second one, the 14th century. That's what you're asking. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the 14th century. So again, the 14th century. The 14th century is known as a difficult point in time. You should be familiar with the 14th century from the context of, again, of it being a difficult period. But the Great Schism really first of all, you have to relate it back to the move of the papacy from Rome to Avignon. And that's important. At the beginning of the 14th century, in 1305, Clement V moves the papacy from Rome to Avignon. This represents a shift in sort of the focus of the Pope. The Pope now in the 14th century becomes basically, I wouldn't say a vassal of the King of France, but very closely associated with the King of France, and that really brings us to the very end of the 14th century. Gregory XI reestablishes the papacy in Rome. And when he dies, there becomes a controversy as to which pope should be elected. First, Urban VI is elected, and in response, French cardinals elect a French pope. And what this means is that we have two separate popes. What this represents is a breakdown in the structure in the power of the church and the relative power of the church. Remember, we talked about the growth of the power of the papacy and the power of the church sort of from the ends of the 11th century all the way through the 13th century. Remember, by 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council, the Pope is legislating on all aspects of people's lives. So the Pope, by the early part of the 13th century, is very much a powerful figure, a singular powerful figure. The schism of the 14th century represents something represents something important because again, the church now, which had built itself to be this tremendously important power from Charlemagne through really the 13th century, now all of a sudden was fractured. There was no singular leader. There was no single leader in control. And from 1378 until 1417, there is no singular control. The church is losing its grasp on the totality and the broad nature of its control, this control that it had worked to build from the late 11th century all the way through the early 13th century. What this will represent, and this is something which we'll talk about more next year, is a breakdown in the authority of the church. The Catholic Church, this represents the fact that the Catholic Church doesn't automatically have unilateral authority over all aspects of one's life. And again, this is the beginning of that process, but it takes the Holy Roman Emperor to demand that the church actually reunites. The Council of Constance, 1414 to 1417, only comes about as a result of the Holy Roman Emperor telling one of the popes that, look, this needs to be resolved. We can't continue to have a fractured church because we're losing authority, we're losing power, we're losing control. So those are the consequences of that schism, and it's telling in that this will be the way in which the church has to, or the fracturing of the church will become a hallmark as we move from the 15th century into the 16th century, that the church will lose its grasp of singular automatic authority over all aspects of people's lives. This will give rise, and again, this is not something for this year, this is something for next year, this will give rise eventually to the Protestant Reformation, for people beginning to ask questions, people beginning to question the relative power of the church, saying to themselves, okay, the church doesn't necessarily have unilateral authority in all aspects of life. So I hope that answers the question, Nina. Okay. Let's see. Oh, we have a question that came in by email from JJ. Okay, question. What are some of the main points of the crusade that you would like for us to know about? Okay, so let's talk first. Ooh, a whole bunch of questions then. This is exciting, guys. Wow, this is exciting. Woo. Okay. By the way, I also have not just the iced coffee, but also some water here. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about what JJ's question was, asking what we know the main points of the Crusades. You should know first off, just as a background to the Crusades. Excuse me. Okay. The nature of the nature of holy war in general. We talked a bit about Augustine, the justification of going out to holy war, of going out to battle for God. That's first off. So that's, again, it's the justification for going out. The lead up to the actual Crusades itself, we should Michal, can you please answer this in extreme detail? Compare and contrast the consequence. I like that. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Get to that in a second. Again, in terms of the Crusades, holy war, the justification for it, the lead up in 1095 to the Council of Clermont, and the council itself, go over the speech that Urban II gives, as to talking about the necessity of shifting the violence that is taking place in Europe. We mentioned the Peace of God movement, the fact that Urban II makes a specific call for ensuring that violence between Christians stop, and that the efforts are relocated to battling the enemy of Christendom, of Christianity, specifically the Muslims who are doing terrible things to the Christian holy sites in the Holy Lands. And so in this speech, Urban II is trying to refocus the shift of Christians, of Christian nobility, of Christianity's perspective, moving away from violence towards each other and violence against those who are considered to be the enemies of Christ, the enemies of Christianity. So you should know the lead up to the First Crusade. We talked in detail about the Jews in the First Crusade. That's important. And we talked, so that's, again, an important aspect of the First Crusade. We talked about the consequences of the First Crusade, what they actually did. You don't need to memorize the dates and the various areas of land that the First Crusaders had conquered. You don't need to know which date the county of Edessa was conquered. But know that by 1099, the First Crusade was largely a success, even though there was very little central leadership, even though the Pope and the church sort of removed itself after calling for the crusade. That's you should know that. We talked about the Second and the Third Crusade in a little more, in less depth. Know the general parameters of why they were called, what they did. The Second Crusade was meant to protect the Holy Land in the middle of the 12th century. And what we begin to see with the Second, and particularly with the Third Crusade, is an involvement in not just nobles or very minor church leaders, but the kings. And by the Third Crusade, we get to the King's Crusade. Even though the Third Crusade is largely a failure in achieving what they want, what we have is two things. First of all, kings getting involved and leading the crusade, and secondly, the church calling for a crusade and the great leaders of Europe actually listening. It exhibits the relative strength of the church and of the Pope. The Pope can command the leaders to be doing this. Okay. So let's see. This is JJ sent an email. Yes, very good. Addison, let's see. Afterwards, this video is posted on your YouTube channel. Right. Yes, it automatically is posted on YouTube following its conclusion. I don't know how quickly it will be because it depends on how long it is. If we go the full length, it will be 2 hours. So it should go up very, very quickly after after we finish with the videos. So you can always watch it then. And again, once you'll see the questions that I'm answering are timestamped on the video. So you'll be able to sort of move from question to question. If there's a specific question you want to see in better detail, you can go see that. So the video will be timestamped on YouTube. And I'm expecting to get many, many, many hits. I would like to see by the final next week, I'd like to see 10,000 views of the video. I don't think that's too much to ask, especially I think if you guys really want to study a lot, I think you should constantly go through this. And yeah, so 10,000 views by next Wednesday. If you get 10,000 views, maybe I'll bring cookies to the final for you guys. Okay. A question from Sammy Voldarski. Hello, Dr. Zadoff. This is very interesting. Hello, Sammy. It's interesting to see that this is a students from other classes are watching this. Wow, fantastic! Again, more people that watch it, we need to get up to 10,000 views. So, Sammy, good luck studying. All right, Michal, I will be 10,000. Okay. Let's get to, this is a question from Michal. Can you please answer this in extreme detail? Compare and contrast the consequences of the fall of the Han Dynasty in China and beyond to the fall of the Roman Empire in Europe through the year 1000. No, I can't. I don't know the answer to it. I think it's going to be, I think it's very, very tough. I don't know the answer, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say. That's why I asked the essay questions. I don't know the answers to the essay questions. I really don't. I think there are a lot of different answers for you guys to think about. That's why I gave you these essay questions. I thought very long and very hard about these essay questions. So I'm interested to see what you guys have to say, okay? All right, let's see. Let's get to another question. This is from Samira, and this is just a question about studying. Do we need to know all of the primary and secondary sources? You need to know the primary and secondary sources that are listed on the review sheets. That's what you need to know. There, under the review sheet, there's a section on the readings that you need to know. You need to know the readings that are listed on the review sheet. Not every single one posted to Haiku, not everyone that we went over, but all of the readings posted on the review sheet. So I hope that answers the question. Okay, let's take another question here. This is from Rebecca. What is the difference between Rachel and her children and the Mainz Anonymous? I don't understand the question. Are you asking the difference between the Mainz Anonymous and the Solomon ben Samson narrative? If you can ask the question again, that'd be very helpful. Okay, thanks. I'll come back to it. Just if you can ask the question again and just be more specific as to what you mean, that would be more helpful. Okay, good. Do we need to know the paintings from Tamira? And this also piggybacks off of the question from Ike, why is art important to the Italian Renaissance? You need to know the basic elements of art and of Renaissance art, what we mentioned in class and what you find in the textbook. You need to know the works of art that we mentioned briefly. And this gets to the question of why is art important to the Italian Renaissance. There is, within the context of the Italian Renaissance, we see new innovations in terms of the creation of art, innovations which are very different than the Middle Ages. Uses of new methods, whether it's the Mona Lisa, and in painting, what we call the 3/4 portrait, whether it's using a natural background. Again, the art of the Italian Renaissance, the focus is on the human body, on natural, putting the human body into a natural perspective, into a natural framework. And those are key elements associated with the Italian Renaissance. What this does is in part, it renews many of the aspects that were utilized in Greek and Roman arts. And part of why the Italian Renaissance is a Renaissance in the first place, it's a renewal of this old Greek and Roman arts and architecture. So that's something that you should, again, textbook goes into more detail. And in terms of knowing the paintings, know the very broad parameters of what these paintings are and what they represent. I'm not expecting you to know the exact detail, but just to know very broadly of what they are. Okay, let's see. Samira, where is the review sheet? The review sheet is on Haiku. If you go to the class Haiku page, if you go to the class Haiku page and you go to the page titled Final Exam Review, you'll find there the final exam review sheet and the reading for the final exam plus the essay questions. So it's the last 2 pages on the class Haiku page. I hope that helps. Okay. Sorry. Text from my wife. Okay. So. Okay. So sorry. Hold on one second. Oh, so this is, what did Isabella of France, Edward III, and Charles IV do to contribute to the society of France? Oh, okay, so Rebecca, I meant to pick up your question on the Crusades. I'll get to that in a second. What did Isabella of France, Edward III, and Charles IV do to contribute to the society of the time? Okay, so now we're talking specifically about the 14th century, and we're talking about the 100 Years' War. So again, this gets to the 100 Years' War, the conflict between France and England. Remember, this conflict between France and England is a historical conflict. This isn't something that comes about during the 14th century, but this is a historical conflict going back really to William of Normandy, to William the Conqueror. Since the time of William the Conqueror, the King of France had controlled significant parts of the King of England, excuse me, controlled significant parts of France. And France, from that point in time, had been working to try to rid itself of English ownership, particularly of Normandy, but at other parts in time, almost half of France. And yet, at the same time, the King of England was also a vassal of the King of France. Again, all of this animosity and this difficulty, and the fact that England held land in France, all of this comes to a head during the 14th century, particularly when Charles IV dies in 1322. He dies in 1322. He was Charles IV was the son of King Philip IV of France. He was also the brother of Isabella of France. Isabella of France is unique in that she is the daughter of the King of France. She is also the Queen of England. She's the wife of Edward II, the King of England. She's also the mother of Edward III, who becomes the King of England. Again, Charles IV dies. He dies in 1322, and the problem is that there was no male heir. There was no male heir to succeed Charles IV, and as a result, Philip VI, who was his cousin, becomes King of France. He wasn't a direct descendant. The closest descendant really would have been Edward III of England. Again, Edward III of England was the nephew of Charles IV. The problem, though, was that even though he was the closest, it was held in England that Edward III would not be able to become the king of France because he would have inherited that role through his mother, and it was determined that was not allowed. At first, he accepted this. Again, Edward III accepted this. Edward III being the King of England. Again, if Edward III had been given this role, he would have been both the King of England and the King of France, uniting these kingdoms into one single rule. At first, Edward accepted the fact that Philip VI was to become the King of France, but he begins to press his claims to the throne, and in 1337, the 100 Years' War begins. Again, the focus of this war at this point was to press Edward III's claim to become the King of France. And this battle, again, this war lasts from 1337 until 1453. The eventual consequence is the French victory over England. Now, it takes time, and for the first, I don't know, about 90 years of the war, England was basically winning. Part of the French victory has to do with the role of Joan of Arc. Part of it has to do with the fact that 90 years is a long time to fight, but eventually France was able to emerge victorious. The consequences of this are important in that France is able to finally rid itself of English control of France. England becomes an island nation. It has no land anymore on the continent, and England becomes an island power, and France is able to emerge from this in the middle of the 15th century, showing it is a dominant force. It controls its own destiny. It's not linked to England anymore, and that the French throne is securely in place, even though it had battled the English for this very, very long conflict. So Isabella of France, Edward III, Charles IV, they're important in that the conflict between England and France comes to a head as a result of their lives and of their actions. And the eventual consequence is that they were able to this issue is resolved, and France is able to assert its dominance. Okay, good. Okay, a bunch more questions. This is fantastic. All right, let's see. Let's see. Any questions by email? Let's see here. What is significant about Chart? I don't remember. When did we talk about Chart? I don't remember. If someone can send me, a reminder, I don't remember. All right, I'm just going to get back to, let's see. Let's see. Again, this is from Tamira. Can you go over everything that we need to know for the test? Yes, we can. If we do that, though, then we will just be broadcasting straight from now until Wednesday. So that's a long time, and we can only do a maximum of 8 hours. So we may have to do a bunch of different sessions. We can just keep going and going and going. We can just constantly have this on. That'd be a lot of fun. I think we should do that. Good. Okay, let's actually take a real question. Again, from Rebecca here, what is the significance of Rachel and her story? Oh, okay, so you want to know the Mites Anonymous from the Solomon Samson narrative. So we looked at the significance of Rachel and her children. So we were talking about the Hebrew First Crusade Chronicles, and we looked at it from a variety of perspectives and for different reasons. Speech at Chart. No, he didn't speak. Okay, sorry. So we looked at it from a bunch of different perspectives. We looked at the Rachel and her story because it appears in both the Mites Anonymous and the Solomon ben Samson narrative. And you analyzed the story as it appears in both narratives, in both tales. And the questions we had to ask we asked and that you answered. What were the similarities? What were the differences? Why the similarities and why the differences may have been there? Why they were there in the first place? And trying to figure out which of these texts, was it the Mites Anonymous, the Solomon ben Samson narrative, which of these texts came first? The Mites Anonymous contains a variety of details. The Solomon ben Samson narratives includes many of those details, but includes some differences. So was the Mites Anonymous written first? Was the Solomon ben Samson narrative written first? Which of these texts, what is the relationship between these texts? Was one written earlier? Are they based on a third separate text? And we again, we determined, and the eventual outcome was that we talked about the fact that the Mites Anonymous is the earlier text. The Mites Anonymous was probably written somewhere around the year 1099 or so. And the Solomon ben Samson narrative is a creation of the middle of the 12th century. And the significance of the story comes from a bunch of different perspectives. So first of all, that in terms of understanding the relationship between the Hebrew Crusade Chronicles, but also we asked the question, and reading the story, we asked the question of whether this was true or not. Whether we were, when reading the story, whether we believe that the story of Rachel and her children is reflective of actual historical narrative, whether this is what actually happened during the attacks during the First Crusade. And to that extent, if you recall, we read the secondary source from Jeremy Cohn to talk about what was called the facticity of these narratives, whether we should, as historians, interpret these Crusade Chronicles as historically accurate, whether we accept them as reflecting events as they happened, or whether they are there to give us a broader message. And we read the story of Rachel and her children to sort of think about that context. Did this woman Rachel actually exist? Did she kill her children? We looked at the various tropes, the names, and we sort of compared we talked about what the story of the Rachel and her children compared to another story of Meshulam and Sipporah killing their son Isaac. I think it was Meshulam and Sipporah killing their son Isaac. And so looking at the various motifs, particularly of Akedat Yitzchak that appears in the Rachel and children story, and talking about the broader context of martyrdom and the meaning of martyrdom. So all of that was discussed in the context of Rachel and her children. Okay, a bunch of more questions here. Okay. Let's take another question. All right, I'm just going through some of these questions here. Just one question from Samir. How many people are on this right now? Right now, there are 11 viewers. Wow, 11 viewers. I think when I did this with my sophomores, I think we had upwards of like 70 or 80 viewers at once, which was pretty cool. But I was doing it for 4 classes, so different, obviously. Okay. Let's see. Tamira, can I explain the Salo Baron reading? No. That's for you to read, not for me to read. But thank you for the question. Okay, let's take here from Ariel. What was the importance of all of the Lateran councils? Okay, so each of the 4 Lateran councils that we talked about, each of them contributes something significant, something different. The first Lateran council sort of as being a part of the investiture controversy and adding a final resolution to the investiture controversy. The second Lateran council talking about Arnold of Brescia. The focus, though, as we move sort of as the church moves sort of from the 1120s through 1215 in the Fourth Lateran Council, is to show and to signify the broader, the greater role that the church has in determining the specific ways that Christians have to lead their lives. When you look at the Fourth Lateran Council, the church begins to legislate very specifically about marriage, about sacraments, about how people need to be living their lives. The church is asserting its uniform dominance in these aspects of these religious aspects of people's lives. This probably, if the church had tried to put the laws of the Fourth Lateran Council into place 100 years earlier, they probably wouldn't have taken, just because the church was still in a relatively weak position. It takes the investiture controversy, it takes the full effect of the investiture controversy, and it takes really the Crusades to put a renewed focus on the relative power of the church as an entity in medieval Western Europe, specifically compared to the relative power of kings, the relative power of monarchs, the relative power of the nobility. The church during the 12th century into the 13th century, is showing that it is a major player on the international scene in the Middle Ages. It's not simply there to help individuals with their religious life, but it's there to dictate what all of Christianity needs to accomplish. So that's the relative importance of the Lateran Councils as a whole. Good. I hope that answers that question. All right, let's take a look at another question here. Okay. Oh, okay. Sorry, guys. A question came in on the email from Marilyn. I'm really stressed about this test. Can you please make it easier? That's a fantastic question. Unfortunately, the test is already made, and I really can't change it now. So the test is not terribly... the test isn't that difficult. It's not. I mean, I know you guys are going to say to yourself, oh, you know all of this, blah, 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 etc. It's... I think it's very fair. I think it's a very fair test. I don't think it's really that difficult. I think you guys are have the essay questions. You guys have the reading. That's a significant portion of the exam. So I think you guys can. I'm expecting some fantastic essays from you guys. I think you guys can do these essay questions very nicely and very well. Okay, let's get back to some of the questions. Sorry, I'm just... answering quickly an email from my wife. She sent a text message. Okay, questions about... There's a question here I wanted to get to. Let's see. I'm just looking for one question here. There's a question about the Banu Kuraiza I saw here. I'm just trying to find it in the questions. Here we go. What were the Banu Kuraiza and what was their role? Okay, so we talked about the Banu. We talked about the three Jewish tribes that appear or that are around the area of Yathrib, that when Muhammad, this gets back to Muhammad in Islam, the three Jewish tribes, the Banu Kuraiza, the Banu Kainuka, and the Banu Nadir, these are the three tribes that are located around Medina when Muhammad comes and establishes the Constitution of Medina and establishes sort of the first Islamic almost state. These are the Jewish tribes with whom Muhammad brings as part of the Constitution of Medina, trying to establish a peace between them. These are the three tribes. We just mentioned the Banu Kuraiza briefly. We didn't read the primary source. We read the primary source about the Banu Kainuka, and the fact that Muhammad in 622, when he first gets to Medina, has to deal with these tribes. They're powerful tribes. They're economically well established. He has to deal with the Banu Kainuka. He's there, and he wants to try to convert them to be followers of Muhammad. They refuse. Muhammad wants, and then there's an incident in this primary source with the Banu Kainuka that one of the followers of Muhammad was raped or assaulted, as the primary source, as the source discusses. And the Jews are blamed, and Muhammad wants to kill the Jews, but the Jews are ultimately saved by one of Muhammad's followers because he wants to protect them, he wants to use them. So that shows in 622, at least, that Muhammad didn't have the control to unilaterally wipe the Banu Qaynuqa off the map. That he had to listen to his followers and he had to keep the Banu Qaynuqa. Now, the Banu Qurayza and the Banu Nadir, these are tribes which Muhammad deals with at a later stage. The Banu Qurayza, he's able to, or at least the Banu Nadir, he's able to kick them out of the area of Medina. And the Banu Qurayza, he's able to actually, he's basically actually able to kill. I believe that's the case. Let me just, let's see. Yeah, he was able to kill all of those Jews because, again, and he deals with them at the very end of his time in Medina before he goes back to Mecca. Okay, let's see. A question from Addison: how long does the essay have to be on the test? That's entirely up to you. It needs to have an introduction, it needs to have a conclusion, the body paragraphs. It's up to you to get your points across. You should use your time wisely on the exam. You will have plenty of time to finish. I'm not expecting the best possible essays. I'm expecting good essays. I'm expecting well thought essays. But it's entirely up to you in terms of getting the points across and answering the question. The question asks for 5 specific instances, 5 specific examples, then you need to mention those 5 examples and talk about them. So it's involved in that sense, but it's entirely up to you in terms of how long the essay needs to be. Okay. Let's look for another set of questions here. And we answered this question before. What was the importance of all the Lateran councils? We answered that question. Let's look here. From Eliana. Did William the Conqueror succeed in uniting England? So he did. He was successful, but remember, he's successful after taking violent action. We talked about the harrying of the North, that in order to place England under his domination, he attacks large-scale elements of England. The harrying of the North is one of the actions that William the Conqueror takes to ensure he has complete domination over a unified England. He also wants to know what he has in terms of the kingdom, and that's leads to the creation of the Domesday Book. Remember, the Domesday Book is a census in essence. It lists for William what lands people own, what families own certain lands in certain locations. It gives him a sense of where everything is. It gives him a sense of what people own, where they own it. He wants to know for himself, and he wants to know so that he could, in theory, and not in theory, but he did give out lands to nobility and to his followers who helped him with the conquest of England. So the answer to the question is yes, he does unify England. He does unify England under a single kingship. That was something new for England. That was different than Anglo-Saxon England, where you have different kingdoms. And you have different kings. So in that sense, yes, but it wasn't the easiest or or something that happens just naturally. He had to work for it. Good. Okay. Let's look at. I'm just looking through the questions again here. I'm just going to take a couple of them. From Ike, who were the people living in England before the Saxons? Meaning before the Anglo-Saxons. The Anglo-Saxons are a Germanic tribe, but the Romans were in control of England. The Romans conquered England. They conquered most of England. They built a wall, which was called Hadrian's Wall. Still exists today. You can go visit it. I know people actually just there now walking Hadrian's Wall in England. So before the Anglo-Saxons, again, Germanic tribe from the continent, invade and conquer England, it was under the Romans. So under the Romans. Good. Okay. Let's see. I'm just checking the old email. From Marilyn 2 minutes ago. Is there going to be extra credits on the test? Yeah, there is. And the last part, there's a you have to answer 6 out of 12, and you have to answer 6 out of 12 questions, and you can do one question for extra credit. So there is. Okay. Good. An important question from Tamir: are you rooting for the Mets or for the Yankees? I'm a Yankee fan. I've been a Yankee fan my whole life. My first memories of the Yankees go back to 1994. I have very vivid memories of the strike the following year, and very, very vivid memories of them winning the World Series in '96, and of course the dominance during the '90s and the early 2000s. Yeah, so big Yankee fan. And I'm a big Yankee fan, but I can have a logical discussion about it. I'm not the guy who's going to say the Yankees are great, the Yankees are fantastic. No, I can have a logical discussion about them, and I don't feel bad if you talk trash. I'm just going to talk trash back about the Mets or any other team. So just FYI. Okay. Again, mention Nespresso, iced coffee, good stuff. And this evening is brought to you by Apple and the letter H for history. Okay. Let's get back to the questions. A lot of just comments here, not questions. So okay, so here's something from Ariel. Can you compare and contrast the Anglo-American model of feudalism and the Marxist model of feudalism? Okay, so I think when you're looking at this, and I think this is important for the third essay question, I think you want to think about what the focus of the two models of feudalism were. The Anglo-American model of feudalism is really focused on talking about the military alliances. The Anglo-American model of feudalism really focusing on the relationship between king and noble, and lord and vassal, in the sense of a military and a political connection. That really is the focus of the Anglo-American. The Marxist model it shifts itself to focus on the economic elements of feudalism. Again, the Marxist model talking about the relationship between peasants, between serf and lord. The Marxist model has its roots in the European Enlightenment, has its roots and some of the great thinkers of the European Enlightenment. This is something which we'll spend a lot of time talking about next year, and which Karl Marx in the 19th century, in the middle of the 19th century, sort of brings into his own work in developing the ideals of socialism into the Communist Manifesto. Here, Marx sees this relationship between peasants and lord, the serf being tied to the land, not being able to get himself out of this economic circle, this economic cycle, and the lord controlling the production of labor. That's the term that Marx will use. And so there are differences in terms of their approaches, in terms of what they focus on. The Anglo-American model is very much focused on lord and vassal, from the consequence of politics, from the consequence of military, from the consequence of what the lord has to give to the vassal land, what the vassal has to give to the lord. And that is military strength, providing knights, providing providing power, providing strength, providing real help when help is needed. So those are the two, again, the broader contrasts, and you can think about the details of those two. Again, that's obviously going to be important for the third essay question. All right, question from Rebecca. What did Charlemagne do, and why is he important? So we talked about Charlemagne. We talked about Charlemagne briefly, and Charlemagne is important for creating a unified Frankish kingdom, or really taking that to a final extent. Charlemagne is important for again, Charlemagne is important for extending Frankish rule. He's important in that he's able to assert his dominance of the king, and limit the power of the nobility. The way in which Charlemagne rules is through sending representatives, royal agents, to parts of the Frankish kingdom, limiting the power of the nobles, really limiting the power of the land-owning nobility in 9th century France. He puts an emphasis on education, he puts an emphasis on learning, he puts an emphasis on understanding, and at the same time, he brings underneath, or under the dominance of the Frankish kingdom, the role of the Pope. The Pope coronates Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. He does this as a consequence of Charlemagne going to Rome and helping to save the Pope from various enemies. So the church is really brought under the influence of the king of Charlemagne himself. Now, Charlemagne unites the empire. The empire basically, he limits the power of the nobility. He limits the power of any of his rivals. That will change, obviously, in the subsequent years, leading to the breakdown of a centralized state in France. Okay, excellent. Let's look at some of the other questions here. Oh, so there's a question here about Philip Augustus, about what he actually did. Sorry, I'm just looking through the questions again. Oh, Michal, you're right. This is a nifty invention. This is fantastic stuff. When I was in high school, guys, this didn't exist. It really did. Not that I was in high school such a long time ago, but when I was in high school, something like this didn't exist. So it's pretty cool that we can spend a couple hours doing this. We're all in different locations. Pretty cool that we can do this. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. All right, I'm just looking for, let's take where did that question go? Here we go. Let's take this question now and then we'll come back to the Middle Ages. Who were more successful, significant to China, the Tang or the Song dynasty? That's an interesting question. Well, that's a very interesting question. They were both significant. Excuse me. They're significant for different reasons. The Tang dynasty, 618 to 907, excuse me. The Tang dynasty, first of all, they are the heirs to sort of the Sui dynasty. And remember, the Sui dynasty comes about in 581, bringing stability to the region. The Tang dynasty really takes what the Sui dynasty does in terms of land redistribution, cheap food supply, creating the Grand Canal, and they really run with it. The Tang dynasty expands the area, the land that fell under that they controlled. They extended the reach of the dynasty all the way through Tibet, all the way through Afghanistan. Now, arguably, this is their downfall: the fact that they stretched themselves too thin. The Tang dynasty is important because it renews trade to the West, back to Europe. Important new technologies during the Tang dynasty: printing, gunpowder, clocks. Important stuff during the Tang dynasty. Their ultimate downfall was as a result of the bureaucracy, and they spread themselves too thin. The Song dynasty, again, they pick up on what the Tang dynasty does, and they continue to run with it. They accomplish more in trade, accomplish more in technology and science. And so it's a matter of really picking up on what the Tang dynasty did and continuing that on in a variety of important ways. So I wouldn't necessarily, in answering the question, I wouldn't say they were more successful, but it would be useful to think about the continuities and some of the continuities that were begun on the Tang dynasty and continue with the Song dynasty, and then the changes that take place during the Mongols, because there are important differences and changes moving from the Tang and the Song into the Mongol period. With the Mongols, we get sort of an unbridled focus really on the military conflict, something that we don't really see with the Tang and the Song dynasty. Obviously, there's a military focus because specifically the Tang dynasty is able to push its limits out into something which hadn't existed in the Sui dynasty and really hadn't existed in the Han dynasty even beforehand. But the Mongols are almost predominantly focused on military excursion and military warfare, not so with the Tang and the Song. So I think that's an important and interesting way of looking at this. All right. Let's look at more questions here. This is fun. This is so much fun. Woohoo! Let's go Mets. Okay, sure. That's fantastic. Let me know when you guys get some offense in your team. So you have great pitching and everything, but let me know when you get some useful offense so you can actually win some ball games and actually score some runs. I think the Mets have scored something like 23 runs over their last 7 games, which not good at all. I'm not saying the Yankees are better, but at least the Yankees have a 39-year-old outfielder named Carlos Beltran who can, actually hit stuff, and a 40-year-old designated hitter who is still hitting some home runs. But anyway, we won't talk about that. We'll leave that for another time. So let's look at something here. Let's look through these questions. Oh, fun questions. Oh, hold on. This is from Rebecca. Who are the Mongols? How did they come to be people? What did they do? So I'm not going to go over this because we went over this at the very beginning. Go back. I would say go back to, once we finished it with this, go back to the beginning of the recording, because this was the first question that we discussed. So I would go back. Rebecca, anyone else who wants to talk about the Mongols, about Genghis Khan in general, you can go back to the beginning of the video of the recording to do this, to look at that. Okay. This is a question I wanted to see. What did Philip Augustus actually do? Okay. So you're reading about France and England. Philip Augustus is involved in the Third Crusade, obviously, even though it is a failure. Philip Augustus was very important because he reformed France. He reformed France in its operation. He reformed France in the way that the central government was able to assert control over parts of the land. Remember, we looked at the varying maps of the land that the king actually controlled compared to the land controlled by his vassals, by the nobility. And remember, when we looked at this, it was a very, very small area of land that the king actually controlled, basically around Paris. What Philip Augustus was able to do twofold, was able to bring more of that land under direct control of the king. But in addition, he also refocuses the central elements of government. Excuse me. He sends out royal agents to parts of France called bailiffs, who put into place the legal system, who changed the legal system to ensure it was keeping up with the various laws that the king actually made. So he reforms reforms France by centralizing power to a greater extent, so that by the time that he dies, about 1220 or so, France is becoming a more centralized state, with the king standing really in the center as the focal point. The nobility losing power in France relative to the gaining of power of the king. This is from Tamir. Are we meeting at Romer on Saturday night to study? I'm happy to. If you guys want to meet, I'm very happy to meet Saturday night, the first night of Shavuos. At the beginning of the night, I would say, to talk and to study with you guys. It can't be that late. Obviously, I mean, it's going to be late, but I don't want it to be starting this at like 1 o'clock in the morning. I'd rather we'll start it at whenever the first shiurim are being held at Romer. We can find a spot to sit and to study. I'm happy to do that. So we can do that on Saturday night. Okay, let's look at more questions. Interesting question from Mr. Cooper. Would you define the end of the Hundred Years' War as the end of the medieval ages? That's a very interesting question. I like that question. Should use that question on the final future years. It's a good question. I would say this. It definitely marks a dramatic change in the circumstances that have defined the Middle Ages, really going back to the 11th century. So by the middle of the 15th century, now we have very different political, very different geographic, very different cultural circumstances. So sure, in terms of that, that could be a hallmark of it. It's tough to say when the ends of the Middle Ages are. That's going to be a question that we really tackle next year, actually, when we talk about in detail the Northern Renaissance and the Protestant Reformation. Most historians would say that the end of the Middle Ages was around the year 1500. So the Hundred Years' War, I think, can be counted as one event in a series of events leading to a change from the Middle Ages to the early modern period. I wouldn't say it's the definitive end or it's the only end to it, but it's one in a series of events leading to the end of the Middle Ages. So I think that would be a useful way to think about it. A very good question. Okay, let's see. From Joel. Welcome, Joel. You said this would be the hardest test of all time. So in all seriousness, do we need to know basically every detail? Is it okay to know important things and the cause and effect of them? Yeah, you don't need to know every detail. You really don't. I want to see general, broad understanding. I want to see your ability to synthesize, to take ideas. The questions that are asked on this test are questions where I'm asking you to take elements that we've learned, elements that you've read, and to think about them in comparison to each other, to contrast them, to think about the context, to think about how they relate to each other, even if they're very dissimilar things. Again, whether it's thinking about Islam compared to the papacy, whether it's thinking about the Mongols compared to Islam. It's important for you guys to be able to try to say, okay, these things are similar, these things are different. So you don't need to know every detail. I'm not expecting to know every detail in terms of dates. I don't care if you memorize each and every date. You need to have a general sense of when these things are taking place. You need to know that if you're telling me the First Crusade takes place at the end of the 11th century, fine. If you write 1093 and it's 1095, 1096, nothing's going to happen to you. If you tell me the First Crusade happens in the year 1350, that's a different story. So you don't need to know every single detail. I'm not talking. You just don't. But you need to be able to frame things. You need to be able to tell me how things relate to each other, and you need to be able to broadly define what these items are. I hope that answers the question. Let's see. All right. Do we need to know the names of all of the kings? You need to know the names of the kings, which we talked about. So again, if you're talking about the 100 Years' War and you miss Edward II and Edward III, I'm not going to do anything to you. That's not really going to affect it. So just keep that. You can keep that in mind. Let's see. Sorry, getting back to Eliana, can we please, during the day on Shavuot, it's going to be very hard for me just because of my family and my family obligations. So it's going to be very hard for me to get away for a couple of hours during Shavuot itself. So I really can't do it during Shavuot itself. So I apologize. That's why the night is helpful. Okay, let's see. This is from Addison. Everyone remember, besides for the reading and the essay, if you do not like a question, you can skip it. It is 6 out of 12. That is true. It is 6 out of 12. And in the second section, it's 5 out of 6. So you do have some choice there, and you do have the reading in front of you. Okay. From Addison, do we need to know the names of all of the popes because they're all very similar, or do we need to know just what the pope did? Yeah, no, I mean, if you mix up Urban II, Urban III again, I'm not going to really care, but yeah, know what they did. I think that's important. This is fun. This is really fun. We should do this like every night. This is fantastic. This is awesome. Okay. Let's see. I'm looking for just going through these stuff here. Oh. Okay. This is from Eitan. What events led to the changes in 11th century Europe? I don't understand the question. What events led to the changes in the 11th century Europe? I mean, we have the Crusades. We talked about the investiture controversy. These are all different. I mean, obviously, there's a lot we didn't talk about in terms of 11th century Europe. 11th. I mean, we talked about the Norman conquest of England, William the Conqueror. These are all 11th century stuff. So, okay, this is from earlier from Michal. How are your sponsors doing? Good. And just a reminder, it's 9 o'clock now. So again, we're sponsored by Apple, by Nespresso, and by the letter H for history. Fantastic. Thank you, Michal. It would be really fantastic, by the way, if Apple actually, saw this and started sending me free stuff. Okay, from Eliana. Were the Jews still being expelled, persecuted by the time of the Renaissance? Yeah, sure. The expulsions, the persecutions take place in different times, different places. We looked at that map of persecutions. The expulsion of Jews takes place in a variety of times, in a variety of places. And yeah, so certainly it continued through the Italian Renaissance. So absolutely. Okay, again from Eliana. Alison, Hannah, and I live on the other side of Teaneck, so it's too far to walk. And no, it isn't too far. It is far. I agree with you. I can't do it during the day. I apologize. I just don't have the time during the day to do another review session. So I apologize. Maybe, and you guys can tell me if this is helpful. It's going to be. I just don't think it's feasible to do it on Tuesday night when Yontif ends. Excuse me. Oh no, Tuesday night is Yontif ends Monday night. All right, so maybe if you guys want to do this Tuesday night, we can do this Tuesday night again. I can, but not for 2 hours. I can do another hour or so. We can do another hour Tuesday night if you guys want to do that sort of the night before. So let me know if you guys want to do that. We can do that. That can be fun to do the night before. I'll have to line up new sponsors ahead of time, but I think I can do that. All right, let's see. Let's look at more questions here. Okay, this is from Rebecca. What are the differences between the Mainz Anonymous, Solomon ben Samson, and the Eliezer bar Natan narrative? So we talked about this a little bit. I'm not expecting you to know. There are differences. The Mainz Anonymous is the shortest of the three. It was the shortest. It was written the earliest. The Solomon ben Samson, Eliezer bar Natan narratives are derivative narratives, meaning they are based partially based on the Mainz Anonymous. The Eliezer bar Natan narrative and the Solomon ben Samson narrative were written in the middle of the 12th century. But I'm not really expecting you to I don't think you don't need to know the major differences. I don't think we really went into the major differences. I'm just looking back through my notes to look at what we discussed. See if there's anything else here. We talked about the three narratives. Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically it. Nothing really else there. All right, let's look at more questions. Tamira, how should I study for this test? Honestly, I would start with the following. I would start with thinking about the essay questions, because I think the essay questions really do focus you on thinking about ways to frame the material, comparing, contrasting similarities, differences. And once you've sort of answered the essay questions, you can then begin to make other connections. So I would begin with the essays. I would, go through the reading, obviously, also, and I would start with the essay questions and then sort of use that as a jumping off points to sort of think about other connections and ways to think about how to relate other topics to each other. So that's actually how I would start, and that's how I would proceed with studying for this test. Nina, can we please do this Tuesday night? I'm fine with doing this Tuesday night again. I know you guys will be studying Tuesday night. What I'm happy to do is to do this for an hour on Tuesday night, and just like if you guys have questions while you're studying, you can ask me questions then. We can do that Tuesday night. I'm happy to do it Tuesday night. I know you guys are studying in different ways. I don't want to force this onto anyone the night before the test, when I know you guys are doing your own thing when it comes to studying. So I'm happy to do this again Tuesday night for an hour or so. I can send out another email with that time. And maybe my wife will make an appearance at the point. She's out tonight at a party for friends of ours who are making Aliyah this summer. So that's that's why she's not here. From Joel. Before we went into our bio final use, yeah, the essays are graded. Yeah, sorry, the essays are graded. I will release the grades tonight. I wanted to, but I did not release them because I wanted to go back and reread a couple of them, just to make sure my comments were on point and to make sure that all of the grades are on point. So I will release them this evening. Okay, so you'll get them tonight. Okay, good. Let's look at some of the other questions. From Eliana, was the church powerful in the Renaissance? Sure, and something that we mentioned in regards to humanism, and this is important. The book mentioned this. We talked about this in class. We talked about in thinking about humanism the fact that humanism is not a rejection of religion or of the Catholic Church, and in fact, humanists. The various humanists that worked in the Middle Ages, humanists they didn't reject the Catholic Church, they accepted the doctrines of the church, but they said that at the same points in time, you can have religion and you can have secular influences, and they're not mutually exclusive. They're working together. That's an important aspect of humanism. Humanism doesn't reject the authority of religion. It accepts the authority of religion, it accepts the authority of the church, it accepts the authority of the Pope, while at the same time acknowledging that humans have talent, humans have ability, and we can use that ability not only in a religious context, but we can use it in a secular context. And that was one of the great innovations of humanism. Prior to the advent of these ideas, these humanist ideas, this is really a hallmark of the Middle Ages. All your talent in theory, and this is again a hallmark of the Middle Ages, was geared towards creating something of a religious nature, creating something for the church, creating something for God. What humanism showed, what humanism tried to emphasize, was that as individuals we have talents, and we can use that talent for religion, but we can also use it in secular matters. And what we do in the secular world isn't a rejection of religion, of the church, of the Pope, but it's a way of complementing it. Now that will change later on. That will change in the 16th century. In the 16th century, and again, we'll talk about this more next year. In the 16th century, we introduced a new concept called skepticism, where people are skeptical, where people are questioning the utility, the power of religion. This is a hallmark of the changes that are enacted, the changes that come into place in the 16th century, whether it's the Protestant Reformation, whether it's questioning religion and specifically, and again, we'll talk next year, whatever whichever class, about skepticism, specifically the writings and the work of Benedict Spinoza, of Baruch Spinoza. That's not what humanism is. That's not what the Renaissance is. The Renaissance is an embracing of religion, but thinking about it in sort of different ways. Okay, good. I hope that answered the question. Okay, let's see. Just going through some of the questions here. I'm just going to check the email, see if there's anything in the email. Oh, very important question from Marilyn. Do I like chocolate more or vanilla? That's a fantastic question, Marilyn. So I would have to say I've had shifts over the course of my life. I used to be a huge vanilla person, like really huge vanilla. Now I think I'm sort of more in the context of chocolate, but it's a fantastic question. So I'm very happy you're thinking along those lines. It's great. Okay, let's look to see additional questions here. From Michal, can we please do this again the night before the final? Yeah, okay, so I will send out another email tonight or tomorrow, doing another one of these on Tuesday night. Figure we'll do, let's say, I don't know, 8-ish or so, and we'll do it for an hour. We'll do this Tuesday night. We'll do it for an hour. I'll take questions like we're doing this tonight. Again, I don't want to. You're in no way required to do this. I'm just doing this to help you guys. You can ask questions. If you don't, if you feel like you want to study just by yourself, that's absolutely fine. But if you, I'm happy to be here to answer questions when we do that. Okay, let's take this question. From Rebecca, how did Islam grow after the death of Muhammad? In which events following Muhammad's death are we responsible to know? So, in terms of the events, you should know about the first of all, after Muhammad's death, you should know about the differences in leadership and the changes in leadership. The four rightly guided caliphs, the first four caliphs who come to power after Muhammad. Again, Abu Bakr and Umar, the beginning of the Islamic conquests made under, beginning with Abu Bakr and Umar. Under Abu Bakr, we have the what are called the Rida Wars, the Wars of Apostasy. That's something that begins under Abu Bakr, and then we see the continuation of the Islamic conquests during the reigns of Umar and then Uthman. During the reign of Uthman, we begin to see challenges, conflicts within Islam itself. Uthman, who's the third caliph, and the resulting civil war, and then after Uthman, the rise of Ali. And the rise of Shia Islam and the differences between Shia and Sunni Islam. Ali, remember, was the cousin of Muhammad. He rules as caliph from 656 to 661. Ali was assassinated in 661, partially or really as a result of the rise of Muawiyah. Muawiyah was the governor of Damascus. He's the leader of the Umayyad dynasty. And this begins sort of the emergence of two sects of Islam following Muhammad's death. Again, Sunni and Shia. Sunni being the largest group. Sunni is defined by the fact they accept the succession of leaders following Muhammad as it developed historically. Sunnis did not believe that they don't believe that Muhammad appointed a leader before his death, and so they accept all of the different leaders that emerged following Muhammad's death. The leader, the imam for Sunnis, the role of leadership has a very different role for Sunnis compared to Shia. Imams or leaders are political leaders. There is no hereditary privileged class. Leaders are basically political leaders. Sunni is not leadership is not a birthright, but it's trust, and that's different than the way that leadership develops within the context of Shia Islam. Just to give you again the percentage, about 90% of Muslims today are Sunni, 10% are Shia. So it's a vast minority of Muslims who are Shia, followers of Ali, claiming that that Muhammad appointed Ali to be the leader of the Muslims following his death. Shia Muslims believe that imams, leaders, are sinless in nature. They're infallible. Authority comes from God. Imams, leaders, are saints. They go to the place of the burial sites, tombs and the shrines of leaders to pray for them or to pray on their behalf. Those are the major differences. Now, again, we talked about the difference between Sunni and Shia, and we talked about the rise of the Umayyads. We talked about the Abbasid revolution. The Abbasids wanted to form a government based on principles of Islam. The Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads. The Abbasids had various alliances. Eventually they kill off all of the Umayyads, and they centralize authority, and they move the center of Islamic power from Damascus to the new city of Baghdad, and Baghdad becomes the centerpiece of Islam, of the Abbasid rule. So that's what you need to know in terms of the development of following Muhammad's death. I hope that is good. Are you mad at Joelle because she didn't bring the cake that she promised to? No, we are not mad. We are not mad at Joelle about that. I'm trying to hopefully we'll be able to, we're going to try to see if we can bake cookies for you guys for the final on Wednesday. So hopefully you guys will have something during the final. Let's see. I am tired. I know not as tired as you guys. You guys are studying for finals. I know it's tough. So I was sitting in meetings all day today, just all day sitting in meetings. Just tough stuff. Sitting there, taking notes, a lot of stuff. Okay. Let's take another question here. How come sometimes the Jews were protected while other times they were persecuted? What caused the change between the different ways that they were treated? Okay, so this gets to a larger question of the relevancy of the Augustinian doctrine and the changes that were adopted. We talked about this on a number of fronts, and we can think about this in a lot of different ways. First of all, we can think about this, the ways that Jews are treated from the context of the Augustinian doctrine. Remember, the doctrine of the witness, that Jews served as a witness to the crucifixion of Christ, and that the Old Testament gives witness to the rise of Christ in the various books of the prophets. Remember, that becomes official church doctrine, becomes the official perspective of the church concerning the Jews. And this is the official church doctrine through the First Crusade, through the Second Crusade. We talked about during the First Crusade that influential members of the church are actually tried to protect the Jews during the First Crusade. The violence comes about really as a result of comes through the work of the masses, of the people. They're the ones who perpetuate the violence, not the church, but the masses. During the Second Crusade, influential church members tried to protect the Jews during the middle of the Second Crusade, so tried to prevent violence. The turning point for the church comes about during the early 13th century with the accusation of that the Jews have moved away from the Bible as their focal point, as their focal book, and have moved to the Talmud, and that the Talmud speaks ill of Christianity, of Jesus, of Mary. And the Jews have elevated the Talmud of being equal importance to the Bible. So from the church, that's the turning point. The turning point is really the first third of the 13th century, where the Talmud is put on trial, where these accusations are made against the Talmud. That really is the turning point for the church. Now, that doesn't. What we have seen throughout, though, is violence perpetuated by the masses, by the people. The violence that takes place during the First Crusade takes place as a result of the masses of the people. Remember, members of the church tried to protect the Jews. The church says nothing about the Jews. It's the masses. When we talked about, remember, we talked about the various accusations, the various accusations made against the Jews, specifically of the blood libel and ritual murder. These were made and perpetuated by largely the people, by masses. Yes, Thomas of Monmouth was a monk. He was a member of the church, but a very low-level member of the church. And we talked about the fact that both the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope later in the 12th and the 13th century tried to put this to bed, tried to make a final determination as to whether Jews do this, and they determined that they don't. So what we see, and this is an interesting way of thinking about it, is a differentiation between is a separate way or differences in the way that the masses, the people, thought about the Jews on the one hand, and on the other, the way that members of the church thought about the Jews. And that's a useful way to think about the dynamic between the two. Okay, let's take a look at some more questions. Dr. Z, let's see. Dr. Zadoff can have a shout out. Sammy, I hope you're studying really hard for finals. So good luck. It's fantastic that you're tuning into this. So fantastic. All right, let's look at some more questions here. How much do I need to study from Tamira? Well, I would say you need to study as much as you feel like so that you know it. But for some of you, I think if you did that, you just wouldn't stop from now until then. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry. By the way, we were up to one point and I think 22 people here. So let's see. So that's pretty cool. That's almost, I know other people from other classes are here, but that's pretty cool. Okay, question from Joel. The lay investiture controversy was an ongoing dispute, correct? Because every time that seems there's a resolution ends up reoccurring. Yeah, Joel. So the investiture controversy, it has its origins in the 11th century and it has its origins in the 1070s. But the dispute continues until the early 12th century. Remember, the First Lateran Council still puts sort of this final issue to rest. Even after the Concordance of Worms in 1122, the First Lateran Council still deals with this issue. So this isn't something that is just dealt with once and for all at the very end of the end of the 11th century, but it continues on into the 12th century. And again, that speaks to the conflict that exists between king and church. The fact that this continues on during the 12th century in England also speaks to this conflict. So yes, it is ongoing. It doesn't stop. It is ongoing, and it's a useful way to think about that. Absolutely. Good job. Okay. Oh, blah, 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 blah. Let's see, more questions here. From Marilyn, another really great question from email. Did they have cookies back then? Did they have cookies? It's a very interesting question. They did have cake. And the reason why I know that is because there is a professor at Yale named Paul Friedman who wrote a book on the sorry, that is from my wife. She's still at the party. She is a party animal. Out on a Wednesday night, 9:23 at night. She is a party animal. Anyway, so Paul Friedman, who is a professor at Yale, put out a book a couple years ago, published a book a couple of years ago on food in the Middle Ages, and published a lot of recipes actually that were found about food that was made during the Middle Ages. And a couple of years ago, a couple of friends and I decided to actually cook some of this food. Now, a lot of these ingredients we couldn't get, and a lot of the actual recipes were not kosher, but they did have desserts. They did have cakes back in the Middle Ages. So, yes, they did. Interesting question. Okay, let's see. This is from Tamira. What is your stance on Trump building a wall? Would you compare it to the Hadrian Wall? That's actually, Samira, that is actually exactly on point. The purpose of Hadrian's Wall was actually to stop the invaders from the north in England from invading into the Roman area of England. So yes, the purpose of Hadrian's Wall was to prevent people from coming in. You're absolutely right. So you can compare Hadrian's Wall to the wall that the Republican nominee for president wants to build. So that's a very, very, very good point. So good job. Okay. From Ike, what is your stance of the death penalty? Very relevant to the Middle Ages. I do have a stance on the death penalty. I'm not going to share it right now, though. But good question. Okay. Let's see. Just looking at some of the other questions. Oh, I'm getting tired, guys. Let's see here. A lot of these are not questions. Let's see. Select from Rebecca. Who was the most influential pope and why? That's a very interesting question. Gregory the Ninth was very important. Urban II was very important. There are a lot of very influential popes. I don't know. They're different. Gregory the Seventh. Many would argue Gregory the Seventh was probably the most important pope of the Middle Ages, largely because he puts the church on a new trajectory in battling in the investiture controversy, in publishing or in putting out the various documents, the Dictatus Papae that he puts out. There's historians call what Gregory did as the Gregorian Revolution. The Gregorian Revolution, the revolution of Gregory VII, and changing the dynamic nature of the church. Many historians would say that without the actions of Gregory VII, we wouldn't have many of the later actions taken up by the church. So that's something interesting. Okay. So sad, only 7 minutes. Yeah, we have a couple minutes left. It is sad. It was 2 hours, though. It went by very quickly, guys. Started out, it was not dark outside. It is very dark outside now. Pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Okay, let's see. If we get, this is from Samir, if we get 10,000 views, can we all get 15 extra credit points? If we get, let's see. No, if we get 100,000 views, then we'll all get 15 extra credit points. 100,000 views. That's a lot of views. That's not going to happen, but we can try. Am I a Republican or a Democrat? Yes, I'm one of those. I will not tell you which one, and I will never tell you which one. Sorry. From Rebecca, make sure to post the essay. Yes, I will make sure to post the essay. Absolutely. All right, let's see what else is here. I'm just looking for some final questions, substantive questions that we can talk about that actually make any sense. Let's see. What do we need to know about the Jews during the Crusade? Oh, where'd the questions go? Oh, there we go. What do we know about the Jews during the Crusade? We talked about this already before. We talked about where the Jews were living. We talked about the relative numbers of Jews that were killed, that died during the Crusades. That's basically what we need to know. Oh, okay. Let's see. But how about from Ike? How about we all walk to the young Israel of Scarsdale? Sure, we will tell Rabbi Morgenstern that we're just going to show up. I'm sure he'll all put us up at his house. I'm sure Simon will love the fact that we're all walking to Scarsdale. So absolutely good, great idea. Okay. All right. So let's answer just one more question or two. From Rebecca, what point did the church have the maximum amounts of power, and at what point did the kings have the maximum amounts of power? Again, this it really does change, and there really are continuities, and there really are flows. I would say if you look at the height of power, really the height of both papal and papal power and the power of the kings, they basically at times they do correspond with each other. So you have, for instance, the great heights of power in France under Philip Augustus in the late 12th, early 13th century, at which point is the same exact point in time in which the Pope is rising in power. You can't identify a single time when one is more powerful than the next. What you can identify, and I think this is important, is that a consistent and a constant battle between the two, and a constant, desire to try to influence, and a constant desire to try to one up each other. And this is a consistent, a constant negotiation between these two powers. So I think that's how you should look at it. Don't look at it as single points in time, but look at it as constantly changing throughout the Middle Ages and constantly going back and forth to each other. Okay. Good question from Ike, and we'll end with this. What is the best show on TV right now, in your opinion? So we've started to watch Silicon Valley on HBO. Really loved it so far. So a lot of fun, really interesting stuff. I would absolutely recommend it. Hopefully over the summer we'll have more time to watch some TV shows we want to catch up on. So that's what we're hoping to do. All right. So I think we're going to end it here. We've gone through a lot of stuff. I will send out an email either tonight or tomorrow in regards to, we'll do this again on Tuesday night. We'll do it for an hour on Tuesday night. Again, we'll do it on Tuesday night. We'll make sure that you guys I'll be here just to answer questions as you're going through the materials. In terms of Saturday night at Romer, I'm happy to show up for a little while at the beginning of the night, and to answer questions for those who are going to be there, for those who can come to Romer on Saturday night. Yeah, so thank you for the questions, guys. It was fun. Again, as you're studying, don't think you need to know every detail. I don't want you to know every detail, but just think about the broader themes. Think about the way that the topics relate to each other. That's what you should really think about. And yeah, so good luck studying for finals. I'll see you guys. I'll be in school tomorrow. I'll be in school on Friday, so I'll see you guys then. I will post the grades to the essays very shortly, and have a good night, guys. So thanks very much, and I'll see you guys around. Have a good night. Bye.